The Aqua Claudia took 14 years and 30,000 workers to complete, but nobody forced Rome to build it. That's the decision we need to examine. In 38 AD, the Roman Emperor Caligula greenlit one of the largest infrastructure projects the ancient world had ever seen. No immediate crisis forced his hand. The city wasn't dying of thirst, but he made the call anyway to spend resources that could have funded armies, temples, or spectacles. The question isn't whether it worked. The question is, why did a leader choose to sacrifice immediate gains for something he'd never see completed? Let's start with what Caligula actually knew. Rome's population in the 1st century was climbing toward 1 million souls. Water came from the Tiber River, polluted, disease-ridden, unreliable during drought. The city had built 3 aqueducts already. The Aqua Claudia would be the 4th. Each one took decades. Each one cost what we'd call hundreds of millions in today's money, and each one had to be maintained forever. Caligula wasn't responding to a vote or a petition. He was making a bet on the future. Here's what separates this decision from most modern infrastructure plays. Caligula would be dead in 6 years. He'd never drink from the Aqua Claudia. He'd never see the project finished. His successor would inherit both the cost and the credit. Yet he authorized it anyway. That's not pragmatism. That's something the Stoics called prosoche, deliberate attention to what endures beyond yourself. Marcus Aurelius would write about this 150 years later. The mark of a mature mind is caring for systems that outlive you. The engineering itself was a marvel, but not in the way you might think. The Aqua Claudia didn't use pumps. Rome didn't have mechanical pumps. It relied on gravity. Water flowed from the hills 68 kilometers away, down a slope so gradual that the drop was only about 30 centimeters per kilometer. To maintain that gradient over that distance required constant surveying, constant problem solving. Engineers had to tunnel through mountains. When they hit rock they couldn't break, they had to reroute. This wasn't a sprint, it was a strategic puzzle played out over years. What fascinates a strategist is the resource math. 30,000 workers, most were enslaved or conscripted. That's 30,000 people not building weapons, not farming, not working in mines. The opportunity cost was enormous. If those workers were deployed militarily, Rome could have conquered more territory. If they were working the fields, Rome could have stockpiled grain against famine. Caligula chose water over conquest. He chose infrastructure over immediate security. That's a decision under pressure, because there's always pressure to maximize the quarter, to show results before your term ends. Here's where the Stoic virtue enters. The Stoics didn't invent aqueducts, but they understood why building them mattered. Epictetus taught that we control our choices, not their outcomes. We can't guarantee success. We can only choose what's worth doing. An aqueduct is a choice to say, the well-being of people I'll never meet, in a Rome I won't inhabit, matters enough to spend my capital now. That's not sentimentality. That's a sober calculation that civilization requires someone to think beyond their own reign. The aqueduct was completed under Caligula's successor, Claudius, who, ironically, gets credit for finishing what he didn't start. Caligula's name is barely mentioned in the inscriptions. He bore the cost, made the decision, and history forgot him for it. But the water kept flowing. For 300 years, long after Rome's emperors were dust, the Aqua Claudia was still delivering clean water to the city. That's a return on investment most modern infrastructure projects can't match. Here's the uncomfortable truth for modern professionals. We're wired to think in quarters, not centuries. Your boss wants results by next review. Your investors want returns in 18 months. Your social media metrics refresh every hour. The Stoic choice, to build something that benefits people you'll never know, on a timeline you won't see, feels like losing. It feels like weakness. It feels like you're being played. Except it's not. The Stoics call this apatheia, not apathy, but freedom from reactive emotion. When you stop demanding immediate credit, immediate results, you become dangerous. You can make decisions others can't. You can invest in systems. You can mentor people who'll never thank you. You can build foundations for companies you might leave. You're no longer playing for applause. You're playing for legacy. Caligula's aqueduct teaches a specific skill, the ability to hold two truths at once. First, you will not see the full result of your work. Second, that's okay. In fact, that's the point. When you build for the future, you're not building for you. You're building for the system to outlast you. The Stoics saw this as the highest form of leadership, not the leader who maximizes their own term, but the one who strengthens the institution for whoever comes next. So when you're sitting in a meeting and someone proposes a project that won't pay off for 5 years, that won't make the quarterly numbers, that requires sacrifice now for benefit later. Recognize what's happening. You're being asked to think like Caligula. You're being asked to choose the aqueduct. The question isn't whether it feels good. The question is whether it's true, whether it matters, whether it's worth the cost. Roman aqueducts lasted because they were built with a different calculus than most things we build. They weren't built to impress. They were built to endure. They weren't built for the emperor's lifetime. They were built for the cities. That distinction between building for yourself and building for the institution is where Stoic philosophy meets grand strategy. It's where personal discipline meets civilizational thinking. It's where you stop being a player and start being a builder. The aqueducts answered Caligula's original question, why invest in something you won't finish? Because finishing isn't your job. Your job is to start. Your job is to make the decision under pressure with incomplete information, betting that someone will care enough to complete it. That's what separates leaders from administrators. Administrators manage what exists. Leaders build what doesn't yet exist, knowing they might not live to use it. This is why the Stoics matter. They teach you to measure success differently, not by what you get, but by what you build, not by what you see, but by what endures. Marcus Aurelius never saw his meditations published. He wrote them for himself as private notes. 2,000 years later, they're still shaping how people think. He wasn't trying to be remembered. He was trying to be clear. The remembering was a side effect. Hard part, the part that separates people who talk about Stoicism from people who live it, is actually making the choice. It's easy to admire Caligula's decision from 2,000 years away. It's harder to make it on Tuesday when the CFO is asking why you're spending money on infrastructure instead of shareholder buybacks. It's harder when you know you'll be judged by quarterly results, not by what you build. But that's exactly when the choice matters. Here's what I want you to notice. Rome didn't build one aqueduct and stop. After the Aqua Claudia came others. Rome built 9 major aqueducts over centuries, not because the first one was popular, not because it made anyone rich, but because the system worked, because people saw that long-term thinking paid off, even if they didn't live to see the full return. That's how civilizations compound. That's how legacies form. One person makes the choice, others follow. The system grows stronger. So the answer to the original question, why did Caligula build an aqueduct he'd never use, is this: because he understood something most of us forget. He understood that leadership isn't about you. It's about the system you leave behind. It's about making decisions that benefit people you'll never meet, on timelines that outlast your relevance. That's the Stoic virtue of long-term vision, not optimism, not naivety. Just clear-eyed acceptance that the work matters even if you don't get credit for it. The question now is what you'll build, not for yourself, for what comes next. Subscribe. Each week we examine decisions that shaped history and the Stoic principles that made them possible, because understanding how the best leaders think is the only way to become one. Subscribe. Each week we examine decisions that shaped history and the Stoic principles that made them possible.